I realize I haven't introduced myself. My name is Stevie Carmody, and I serve as the intern minister here. I use he, him, his pronouns. When I was in 5th grade, I started wearing glasses to adjust how I saw faraway things. Now, for those of you in the room who haven't gone through this experience, I hope to share a little bit of this transformation. For instance, the elementary school that I went to was made out of bricks. So every day I would come to school and I would see the walls of my school as a textured wash of crimson. But on the day I first put on my glasses, I marveled at the detail of every brick and the white mortar between each brick in such crisp focus. Similarly, it changed the way that I looked at trees. Before glasses, I saw the general shape of the boughs, with the leaves arranged like some impressionistic brushstroke. But with glasses, suddenly each individual leaf had its own contour, and each leaf had a unique way of shadow and light playing off its green shape. My neighborhood canopy became so visually stunning and intricate. But the way I see the world with and without glasses are both valuable to me. They each give me important information about the world. For instance, in college, taking my first painting class, I was out in the California high desert, and I was struggling to draw the landscapes before me. Behind my easel, I would use my glasses to recreate the detail of the shapes before me, the angles and the lines, just so. But without my glasses, I was more attuned to the contrast of light and shadow, more attentive to the way the hills changed colors as if they faded to the distance. In our lives, we have many metaphors for the lenses through which we see the world. That phrase, rose-colored glasses, speaks of seeing the world in a way that's overly optimistic. Or we talk about someone who has a cynical worldview, where everything is seen on the basis of self-interest. In the academic world, the feminist lens describes closely looking at how women are portrayed and impacted by the world around us. There are many lenses to see the world. In the study of theology, there is a name for these multiple lenses: hermeneutics. I think the word has its root with the Greek god Hermes, who was the messenger and the trickster and the one who went between the world of gods and the world of mortals. So it makes sense that this god would be associated with something that's related to interpretation. Hermeneutics means paying attention to the metaphorical lenses that we wear and through which we view the world. It comes from the recognition that we interpret the world through the lens of our own experiences. So we must pay attention to both the lens and what we see through the lens. But these lenses are not only things that academics think about. I want to give names to two lenses that I think are crucial for interpreting our everyday world. And in the end, I think these two lenses, have everything to do with what love looks like. I call them the generous lens and the critical lens. In the stories of Stone Soup, we saw these two lenses on display. The anchor from Generoso TV represented, you guessed it, the generous lens. From this report, we heard an account of Stone Soup that highlighted the good intention of those weary travelers, taking seriously their need for food, interpreting the process of this soup-making activity in a very kind light, and valuing the people and relationships over laws and distrust. From the anchor at True Facts News, we heard more about the ongoing hardship of the villagers. the robberies that sowed seeds of distrust towards outsiders, and all the rules and laws that the intruders were breaking. This represented the critical lens. Sure, these were caricatures that we had before us, perhaps reminding us of some national news programs that tend to dictate how we debate about national events. But it's no wonder, because talking about media biases is often a way we debate the work of interpretation. But I want to leave behind all of our judgments of politics and political news. The reason is because while political media is trying to sell us one brand of interpretation, the truth is we have the freedom to choose how we interpret the world. And outside the skewed world of politics, both the generous and the critical lens have very valuable information about the world. Imagine a high schooler who's got a big assignment that's due, and they just know that they aren't going to finish it on time. They write a message to their teacher explaining how all the basketball practices this week ran late, and how they've been worried about their sick brother. And when they finally sat down to start the assignment, they just realized how long it was going to take, and they got overwhelmed by the deadline. Now, the teacher in this situation has a choice of interpretation. The teacher could take the generous lens, showing understanding for how busy high schoolers tend to be, and empathy for the student's worry. The teacher could trust the student that the student has the best of intentions and really does need some extra time to get that assignment done. Or the teacher could take the critical lens. If basketball was another commitment that the student made, the student needs to learn priorities and consequences. The teacher might worry about fairness when considering this student's worries, because who knows what's going on in the houses of other students. And certainly the student should have started that assignment much earlier than the night before, so that they'd have some sense of how long it would take. The lens that the teacher uses will have an impact on the student, on the class, and on the teacher themselves. If the teacher's end goal is the well-being and growth of all of their students, the teacher has a choice to make. But furthermore, I'd say that the lens that the teacher chooses will probably be informed by lots of other things. For example, the pressure that the teacher might feel to have high-performing students, or the particular mood that the teacher is feeling on that day, or the teacher's relationship and history with this particular student. And furthermore, these lenses also have their basis in the experiences that the teacher went through. For example, a teacher who showed them compassion in a time of need, or a teacher who kept strict expectations in a way that helped them grow. Indeed, our experience of the world will have everything to do with what lens we bring to a particular situation. Both compassion and criticism are things we learn through experience. Compassion stems from, as Marty's reflection on generous love shows us, from that emotional identification of oneself with the experiences of another. And it just flows from us. Marty's son showed compassion for kids suffering from muscular dystrophy by giving away something that was very valuable to him. And Abby showed compassion for the misnamed boy in her group by standing up for him. From this point of emotional identification, compassionate action grows out. But criticism also stems from an experience of seeing the consequences of being in the world. Like compassion, it can be rooted in a witness or experience of hardship and loss and suffering. But instead of seeking understanding for the experience of one person, like compassion does, the critical lens focuses on the big picture, and it tries to judge at the site of injustice. The generous lens, rooted in compassion, gives people the benefit of the doubt, understanding them in their own context. But to do this, you have to focus on just one perspective at a time. And in that focus, you are making a decision. Who are you going to interpret generously? And the critical lens holds people accountable to the consequences of their actions, often revealing the patterns of power that might be flowing through a situation. But in this view, the particular circumstances of individuals is sometimes covered over. What's more is that I think these two lenses are just so opposite of each other that when we're wearing one of the lenses, we cannot see the other one for what it is. Think about it. How many times have you heard the critical lens criticize someone who's being compassionate by saying that they're coddling someone, or they're letting them off easy, or they're being a softie? And how many times have you heard from the generous perspective describing someone who is being critical as too harsh, or cold and unfeeling, or attacking the person? We risk, with this black and white thinking, of getting addicted to just one lens of seeing the world. Nowhere have I seen us be more contested about the two lenses of generosity and criticism than our conversations regarding race and racism. And of course, the lenses we use should be at issue, since race and racism have so much to do with how we're socialized in the world, and what we've experienced, and what our expectations are for how people are treated. Over my time learning to become a minister, I've been a part of a lot of conversations on the topic of racism. And sometimes I've struggled to speak from either of those two lenses. I worry about being too understanding and offering too much compassion to people with a white identity, to the exclusion of the feelings, needs, and experiences of people of color. Because I was raised seeing things from a white perspective, I sometimes see my generous lens being more often applied to white people. And the results of that can be really harmful, especially when I'm leading the conversation. And on the other hand, if I want to put on my critical lens in these conversations, if I want to express some challenge to the way we are together that expresses some critical aspiration about how the world should be, I worry about overlooking the particular circumstances of others in the room. And all the while, if my critical lens or my generous lens is coming from a place of defensiveness, from the place of those anxieties and worries, it ends up being no good for anyone. There are wise folks, though, who I've watched carefully in my life, who have learned to integrate both their critical and their generous lenses. It doesn't mean, I don't just mean in conversations about racism, but in other parts of life too. And these wise folks do this work of integrating their compassionate outlook and their judgmental outlook in a way that is rooted in love. Thinking back to the teacher who had that choice of interpretation when their student was late on a deadline, it mattered what lens the teacher chose, but it also mattered why they chose that lens. If the teacher's perspective came from a place of love, wishing for the flourishing of the student, then either that generous, compassionate approach or the strict and critical approach could have been appropriate. I remember one time in an anti-racism training I took pretty early on. It was led by the People's Institute, and there was this phrase that they used. They encouraged all of us there at that training to be critical lovers of the institutions we were a part of. Critical lovers. To care enough about the institutions we served to examine them very carefully and fully for how race prejudice was showing up in them. That phrase, critical lovers, is one that stuck with me for many years. I believe that the phrase comes from a quote from James Baldwin in his Notes of a Native Son when he writes, while describing his autobiography, he says, "I love America more than any other country in this world, and exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually." I love America more than any other country in the world, and exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually. Baldwin speaks to me of a critical attitude that doesn't come from meanness or ill will, but rather care and hopefulness. And Baldwin speaks to me of a generous attitude that doesn't come from a fear of confrontation, but rather a willingness to engage in hard conversations. That's what I think this phrase critical lovers might mean, the integration of those generous and critical lenses. I found myself practicing this outlook in kind of a funny way. It's like when I'm back out in the wilderness trying to paint my landscapes, but instead of taking my lenses on and off, I'm putting on different lenses of interpretation to see what the world looks like through my generous lens or through my critical lens, and seeing what perspectives they offer to a situation. Like, I wonder what was going on for that person, or did they realize that when they did that, this happened? The lenses end up giving us multiple perspectives on a situation, like making a two-dimensional picture suddenly three-dimensional, even if we decide in the end to act on only one of those sides. It's a strategy that I recommend, one that I think might help us live more deeply into our second principle of Unitarian Universalism, justice and compassion in human relations. In all our relations with our own selves, in our relationships, in our communities, and how we engage the world, let us cultivate both the critical eye for justice and the generous eye for compassion simultaneously, that we may both help ourselves and our world grow and nurture and care for them as they do. Indeed, may this be the love we live as we interpret and act in the world. Blessed be.
I invite you to rise in body or in spirit as we sing Mi Pequeñita Luz, This Little Light of Mine. Yes, Alex is going to join us. Let's sing along.